What if I told you that Casio made a secret 200-meter capable dive watch that has a 40mm case? Simple question, would you be interested? Because I know that one of the main complaints when it comes to the popular Casio Duro is the ridiculous 44mm case size, meaning that it wears like a pizza box on average size wrists like mine. The watch community has been begging for a smaller Duro for a number of years now, and guess what? Casio actually answered us. But unfortunately, our true requests must have gotten lost in translation, because the new smaller Duro is a bigger letdown than the ending of Game of Thrones. Casio delivered a 36mm case diameter and a pitiful 16mm lug width. Not only was this new Casio just way too small, but they downgraded the water resistance to an embarrassing 50 meters. So we're still waiting for the fabled 40mm Duro. Or are we? Well, this Casio model is a bit of a hidden gem. It has barely had any coverage here on YouTube by us reviewers. Therefore, there is an extremely high chance that you've not seen this model before. This watch does indeed come in with a 40mm case diameter. It has an external dive time bezel, and most importantly, a 200-meter water resistance rating. So for all intents and purposes, this Casio model is basically the 40mm Duro that we've all been asking for. In fact, I actually believe this watch to be better than the Casio Duro. Let me explain why. I'll first say that the Casio Duro is a watch that I've owned in the past. I still do think that the Duro is a great watch for a collector, but only if you have the wrist size to support it. So if you have an average or below average wrist like me, then I think this Casio is the logical choice to make. Now let's start off with the reason why you're here and the reason for this video, and that's the dimensions. This watch comes in with a 12mm thickness. The lug to lug is just 48mm, and the case diameter is 41mm. But wait, I thought you just said this is a 40mm watch. Are you scamming me? Is this clickbait? Well, the right hand side of the case features one of the longest crown guards I've ever seen on a watch. These crown guards start right after the lugs and finish at the crown. This extra little bump of steel adds on an extra millimeter to the calipers when measuring the watch. However, the diameter of the bezel, including the grip, is bang on 40mm. So although you can't technically get a 40mm measurement with this watch both looks and feels like a 40mm watch on the wrist. So if you're happy that Casio has finally made a 40mm dive watch, then drop this video a like rating. Cheers. But the insane part of the dimensions is that this watch and the Duro actually shares the exact same lug to lug measurement at 48mm. But I think you'll agree that in terms of balance, this Casio 1053 has much better proportions, especially when you consider the 20mm lug width on this watch over the 22 of the Duro. The silhouette of this 1053 simply looks like a well-designed dive watch, and with those sharp lugs and that chunky coin edge bezel, the case itself gives off proper vintage Rolex energy. There is a little bit of added detail on those lugs, however, with like an extra little line running down them. I have no idea why this exists on the lugs, but it looks pretty cool. The finishing is super basic here though, polishing to the sides, brushing to the lugs. That's it. But some will absolutely argue, and maybe fairly so, that this can't be considered a Duro alternative because it doesn't have the same dial design, with the Duro of course featuring those Rolex Submariner style hour markings. I can see how this dial design may be a big reason for one's love of the Duro. It's minimal, classical and legible, but dare I say that I actually prefer the dial design of this 1053. It certainly has more originality to it than the Duro design, and I think that it could be argued that it's more legible too, with those Rolex Explorer style numerals at 12, 6 and 9 punching through the glass. But let me know which style design you prefer down in the comments. Is it the 1053 or the Casio Duro? But in terms of dial quality, I don't think there's an argument that this 1053 is miles better. This Casio features a subdued sunburst finish like the Duro. However, there's this inner 3D ring on the 1053 that adds an extra level of detail. The applied markers or faux applied markers have more detail to them, with them having more angles. But having that date complication at the 3 o'clock framed is for sure the biggest win for the 1053. I do think though that this watch suffers from the same small hand syndrome that the Casio Duro has. I absolutely prefer the sword style hands on this model, with this hand design having links back to military watches. I just wish there was a little bit bigger. The minute hand doesn't come close to the minute track, and the hour hand doesn't even touch a single hour marker. I think the style of them absolutely does match the vibe of the watch. It's just a shame that they're tiny. But for a Casio, the luminescence on this watch is actually alright. I mean, your average micro brand watch will definitely put it to shame, and I certainly don't think that this is a watch for the nightstand. But for a $50 dive watch, you can't really complain. And yes, this does feature a lumed seconds hand and a lume pip on the bezel, so it's still fulfilling the dive watch requirements. Speaking of, this bezel has really confused me. One of the first things I noticed when unboxing the watch is that the bezel is misaligned. No biggie, these things happen. You know, it's usually a lucky dip with these things anyway, right? But then I also checked the alignment with the other markers on the dial, and it turns out that when twisting the bezel, some of them line up and some of them don't. So I counted the clicks. For some strange reason, Casio has put a 90 click bezel on this watch. So basically, on every single one of these watches, you'll never be able to align the bezel perfectly with every single hour marker. Some perfectly align, but some are horribly off. And you can't just remove the bezel and realign it, because then it'll just be misaligned with another area. And what a shame it is, because this aluminium bezel insert is absolutely beautiful. And I also really enjoy how the bezel looks with that chunky coin edge construction. So why, oh why, Casio, have you made it literally impossible to align the bezel with the dial? But I do review hidden gem Casios like this on the channel all the time, so make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to see some more. Thankfully, the sloppy watchmaking doesn't continue with the rest of the watch. I am happy to say that this 1053 features a screw down crown and a screw down caseback, giving me ultimate confidence in this 200 meter water resistance rating. Admittedly, the 3 o'clock crown is a bit small, but given that this is powered by a quartz movement, you shouldn't have to use it too much anyway. Casio uses the module 2784 inside this watch, which, fun fact, is the exact same movement that is inside the Casio Duro, which does kind of explain the small hand syndrome. This movement has a stated accuracy of plus or minus 20 seconds per month, and has an average battery life of 3 years. Covering these tiny T-Rex hands is a flat piece of mineral glass. I'd have personally preferred a piece of acrylic, but that's just preference. I hate mineral crystals, they're awful. But there is one area of this watch that is so bad that you'll likely have to throw it out almost immediately. One thing I will give Casio props for is how well the end links integrate with the case. The tolerances are so tight, they look like they aren't even going to come off. But thankfully they do, because this bracelet is hideous. Listen, it's usable. You could size it and wear it if you had to. And I actually think it's a good looking bracelet in terms of the design of the links. But my word, is the quality awful. Folded links that pull your arm hair out for fun. A horrible pressed clasp with only 2 levels of micro adjustment. Do yourself a favour and pop it on a decent strap. The 20mm lug width means you should already own some, and if you don't, then just buy some. I'd absolutely recommend a Waffle rubber. It's been my personal favourite combination. I'll leave a link for the one that I have in the description. I imagine though that a lot of people are going to be thinking, should I get this 1053 or should I get the Casio Duro? Well, in terms of price, this 1053 is currently cheaper than the Duro. For wrists that are 6.5 inches and below, do yourself a favour and get the 1053. 7.5 inches and above, get the Duro. If you're in between, then pick the watch that you like the look of the most. I think that the case and bezel is prettier on the 1053, but I know most will prefer the dial design of the Duro. If I had to pick one for my collection, I would choose the 1053 on this Waffle rubber strap. If, however, you want a Casio watch that has Seiko Alpinist functionality, then go and check out my review here on a watch that delivers that. Casio, Seiko Alpinist, compass bezel, great video, go watch it. I'll see you over there. Bye for now, guys.